Welcome to the Superhero Leadership Podcast, hosted by former CEO of Marvel Entertainment, Peter Cuneo. Listen as he explores outstanding leadership through the lens of successful superhero leaders. Here's your host, Peter Cuneo.
Patrick Butler is the founder of Patrick Butler Enterprises and most recently served as the president and CEO of America's public television stations, where he helped secure record funding and expanded their role in education, in public safety, and in civic leadership. Before that, he spent nearly 2 decades as a senior executive at the Washington Post Company, where he launched Newsweek Productions and produced over 200 hours of award-winning documentaries, including an Emmy winner. He was also instrumental in advancing smartphone technology, launching conference platforms, and supporting public opinion research through what became the Pew Research Center. He advised presidents, CEOs, and world leaders. He served in the White House under Ford and Reagan, and he played a key role in greenlighting Ken Burns' The Civil War. And in the interest of full disclosure, Pat is my brother-in-law. Welcome, Pat. So you have the distinction of being the first person related to me that I've ever interviewed. No one else has made the cut before.
I'm honored. Thank you.
And you are clearly at the top. The thing that I think about when I really reflect on Pat and his time in Washington, which has been many decades now, I see a person who is very good at positive relationships, working or personal, with other human beings, regardless of their side of the aisle, their politics, or their strong opinions on any one subject here in Washington. Pat doesn't really reach across the aisle in my mind. He walks the aisle. Can you talk about your family and your life in Tennessee growing up and the years before Washington started?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. My father in particular was the example of leadership in my early years and for many years thereafter. He was a teacher and he was a minister and he was a school principal. And so I could just watch my father standing in front of a classroom or running a faculty meeting or standing in front of the congregation of our church delivering a sermon. And my first experience in media was helping my father with his radio program on Sunday mornings in a little town called Kimball, Tennessee, where I grew up. And my father let my brother and me read the Bible verses that were the theme for his sermons on these Sunday mornings. And so that was my first introduction to media when I was about 6 years old. I learned quite a lot from my father about leadership and about getting along with people, and about the strong belief that he had that we were all children of God, that we all had a role to play in our society, in our country, whether it was large or small, that each of us was worthy of dignity and respect, whatever our walk in life may be. I was happy to grow up among farmers and textile workers and miners and so forth, some of the finest people I've ever met in my life, and I've met quite a few by now. And so that grounding was really important to me, and I think looking back on it, it has helped shape my outlook on life and on people in ways that I never dreamed possible when I was growing up in that little town in Tennessee.
How about your mom? She was a little quieter in the background, so to speak.
Well, she was. My mother had a very strong Christian faith. She considered herself a servant of people. She was a school secretary later on in her career, but for many years when I was very small, she was the church secretary, unpaid, while my father was the minister at a series of churches. And her role was always being supportive of my father, but in addition to that, being a good mother to my brother and me, and also being a counselor to people in our community, in our congregation, and just reminding them that there are standards that people should try to meet, and recognizing that we all fail to meet those standards from time to time, and that it's just important that we hold ourselves to high standards and try to meet them even though we all know we're gonna fall short. She had a very profound effect on me, always trying to live up to those standards. She is still talking in my head all these years later, and that's a great gift for me.
High school, very diverse experience, I suspect, for you. You were a student officer, if I remember correctly.
I was president of my senior class, and I was fortunate to be an all-state trombone player, and I was on the tennis team and such things. And I had a wonderful time with my high school class. We get together for reunions, not only on the occasions that everybody else does, but we make them up. We all had our 75th birthday last year, and we all got together for a big 75th birthday party, having really nothing to do with our high school calendar. Those are friends that I made, most of them in the seventh grade when I was 11 or 12 years old, and they've been friends for a lifetime. So they too had a very important influence on me. One of my claims to fame in high school was I got to be a pretty good bowler, to the extent that my bowling coach told me that I should stop thinking about going to college and go on the professional bowlers tour. And I went home and told my parents what Coach Shoemate had said to me, and they said, "You may never talk to that man again."
Yeah.
So it was a colorful time, and I was happy to be surrounded by people who with whom I had a great deal of fun, and for whom I had a great deal of respect. And the best of it all is we've stayed together now for all of these 60 plus years, and look forward to seeing each other and picking up right where we left off.
Did your interest in politics start in college? Or, well, you were, of course, president of your senior class, which was certainly, in effect, political.
My interest in
Mhm.
politics started, I know the exact minute. My parents let me stay home from school when I was in the sixth grade, and I was able to watch President Kennedy's inaugural ceremonies. And I remember exactly the time when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And that was the motivation for all of my life in public service. I wanted to be responsive to that very inspiring call, and that was the moment when I said I want to live in that world. And so I was a poor kid in out of the way rural Tennessee, but 8 years later I was working in Washington, and a few years after that I was actually working in the White House. So that was a seminal moment for me in my life, and I was able in high school to be a surrogate for President Johnson when we had a sort of a class election, who should win, Goldwater or Johnson, and I was President Johnson's surrogate, and I won handsomely. And I thought, this is a good experience, and this is work that I think is important to do. And I was happy to have the chance to do it for so many years thereafter in ways that I would never have dreamed possible when I was first starting out.
How did you first get to Washington?
I had been a newspaper reporter for the Chattanooga Times, and after my sophomore year in high school, the Times offered me the best job on the newspaper, covering City Hall and politics, when I was at the grand old age of 19. And I got to know Senator Howard Baker in the course of my work, and Senator Baker and I got along very well from the very beginning. And he pulled me aside one day and said, "I think you might like to come to Washington and just see if you like it, and spend a year or two and see if you like it." That was in the summer of 1969. I came here shortly thereafter here to Washington, and I've been here for almost 56 years now. And I worked for Senator Baker one way or another, either on his staff or as one of his informal advisors and member of his kitchen cabinet for 45 years, from the time I was 19 until the day he died in 2014. So he was an enormous influence on my life, and he made possible all the other things that have happened to me here in Washington over these past 5 decades.
What did you learn about leadership from Howard Baker? I didn't even know you or barely knew you back then. But, I was a fan of Howard Baker, too. I saw him in action on television, in hearings and what have you, for which he handled himself, I thought, just brilliantly. But what was it about him that, you saw as a mentor and that you wanted to learn from?
There was an innate decency and civility about Senator Baker that I always found attractive. There was an intelligence, there was an integrity, and there was a humility on his part that I found particularly attractive. He often said that one should hold in the back of one's mind the possibility that the other fellow may be right. And that was quite an important lesson for me. I mean, a lot of people in today's Washington think they have a monopoly on the truth, and Senator Baker never did. He was always open to other ideas and other points of view, and that openness was one of the most important things he taught me and everybody else who ever worked for him, while holding on to a core of convictions that he also thought were important, and the courage that he showed in everything from his investigation of the Watergate scandal to the ratification of the Panama Canal treaties, to working on the very first environmental protection laws with Senator Edmund Muskie of Maine across the partisan aisle, when not many people were thinking that environmental protection was very important. He was able to see ahead and see how important it was going to be, and making all of these decisions, regardless of the political consequences, was a study in leadership that I and everyone around him, including his fellow senators, appreciated and respected. When Senator Baker was the Republican leader, one of his colleagues said, when asked by a reporter, "Well, who among the senators do you respect most?" And this senator said, "Well, there's Howard Baker, and then there's all the rest of us." And so having an opportunity to work for him as closely as I did for as long as I did gave me some real insights and tremendous experience in becoming a leader myself as life went on.
I'll be back in a moment with more of Superhero Leadership. Stay with us. Seems to me that you were able to foster a series of mentors, in government here in D.C. And you took a personal leap with each one, whether it's, with regard to leadership or your personal life or whatever. It's a credit to you to basically have had all these people see something in you that maybe you didn't even see in yourself. Some of us have had that experience. I know I have multiple times in my life. In my case, though, I chose to take the shot anyway, not thinking. We call this, I think the latest phrase is imposter syndrome, where you really don't think you belong, but what the heck, you'll take the shot. And all those worked out for me because at various times I managed to find people who really thought more of me than maybe I thought of myself. And I wasn't lacking in confidence, but just how high could you go? That had to affect you a lot, and you learned different forms of leadership maybe from each one.
Maybe the boldest thing I ever did was to apply for a job at the White House that did not exist. I was bold enough at the grand old age of 25 to write a speech that President Ford could have given to his first joint session of Congress. And I sent that speech and a cover letter to a man named Bob Hartman, who is the counselor to the president in charge of the speechwriting staff. And I said, "This is what I can do. If I can be helpful, I'd be honored." Well, Mr. Hartman called me back about a week after I had sent that letter and said, "Why don't you come in and let's have a talk?" And so at the grand old age of 25, I was offered a position as a speechwriter for the President of the United States, just on the strength of a draft speech that I I had written. And President Ford himself pretty soon found that I was adept at writing an applause line. I could get the audience on its feet, or I could get the audience to applaud and get enthusiastic about what he was saying. And he said, "You're going to be on the plane with me for the 1976 campaign." So here I was, 26 now, and riding around the country on Air Force One with President Ford as he was, first of all, defeating Governor Ronald Reagan in the Republican primary for the presidential nomination, and then running a very robust campaign against Governor Jimmy Carter of Georgia for the general election. And because the president had found a peculiar and particular talent in me in being able to rouse a crowd, I became an unlikely member of his circle. So he and I got to be pretty close, despite the difference in our status and our age and so forth. And we developed a friendship that lasted the rest of his life. And I felt very fortunate to have a tremendous honor and an unbelievable opportunity to serve him and serve my country as I had hoped to do since President Kennedy's call 15 years earlier. And so I just consider myself among the most fortunate people in the world to have had a particular talent that was useful in the moment, and that has helped me to launch related careers, but not exactly the same career as life has turned on. That was the most important thing I ever did, I guess, professionally, was just have enough confidence in myself that I could make bold to presume that I could put words in a president's mouth that would be useful and effective and persuasive, and I did, and he did, and the rest, as they say, is history.
It's interesting because we talk in leadership a lot about being an effective communicator, and one of the weaknesses that we see in a lot of poor leaders is they don't communicate well, or often, or hardly at all in many cases. And so words matter. And I think it's fun for me to think about your words. You were leading indirectly with your words for a president, and how much impact you actually had. Now, the president, I'm sure, read these and he could make changes, of course, beforehand, but I'm guessing he probably took most of what you said with no change.
He was a good editor, and he wanted things said his way, and he didn't like a lot of rhetorical ruffles and flourishes, and so we had to learn to strike all those out and just just talk in plain language that anyone could understand, which was the most effective thing for him. And I learned through that that there is tremendous power in simplicity and in clarity, and in not really trying too hard to be impressive with rhetoric. And so I have tried in all of my incarnations since then to have to apply those same lessons to my own leadership demands, and just make sure that people understand what it is I'm trying to say, and to say it in as simple a way, as compelling a way, as clear a way as I can. And I think that really is the heart of leadership, is to have a vision and to be able to express it clearly and persuasively and compellingly, and then to have the persistence to see it through. And so those are things I learned from President Ford, from President Reagan, and from others that I've worked with over the years. And it doesn't require a lot of high-blown rhetoric and fancy words. It just means making sense and doing things and calling on others to follow you, that the country needs, or that your company needs, or that your industry needs, and that's leadership.
That's great, and I hope our audience is listening closely or watching, because as I've said many times, I think communications and being effective is the essence of leadership. That's how you get people to get excited about your programs, your views, where you want to take a certain organization, in case of a president, where they want to take a country.
When I first became the president of America's public television stations, our membership, and this is 338 public television stations around the country. Our membership was feeling defeated. They were feeling that no one appreciated what they were doing. There were threats to our funding at both the federal and state levels. And the first speech I gave as president of America's public television stations was just to remind all of these general managers who were doing good work every day that what they were doing was important, and not only important, but essential. And I went to some lengths to just remind them what all they do that they just took for granted and that they shouldn't take for granted. I had a moment of inspiration, which wound up inspiring all of them to sit up a little straighter in their chairs and to say, yes, that's right, we are doing important work, and it's worth defending, it's worth funding, and it's worth our doing everything we can do to do it better in our communities every day. And so people who were with me at the beginning and at the end, still of my tenure with America's public television stations, would all say that was the most important thing that I did. Was the first thing I ever did for public television was to remind them just how important they were and how much pride they should take in their work and how much they were worthy of support by the public and by the governments that support us.
On my podcast, Peter Cuneo, we often talk again about positive energy for leaders. On petercuneo.com, we have something called the 32 super essentials for superhero leadership. And the first one of 32 is show positive energy from minute one. And great leaders get through the tough times and are able to just, at least for public consumption, not show when times are tough. And I'm pretty sure there were times, you were there for 14 years as the CEO of public television. And almost every year I would read in the newspaper that someone wanted to defund or cut the funding for public television. Every year I suspect you had a fight, and you had to fight both sides of the aisle, not fight, but convince, if you will, to keep the funding and in fact increase funding, as I believe you did. Would I be safe in saying that was perhaps your finest moment, your crowning achievement in a sense at public television?
Well, probably so. And the way we did it, Peter, was a little counterintuitive. We stopped talking about all the national programming that we're so proud of that appears on PBS on a regular basis. Masterpiece Theater and Ken Burns and all the other things that people love about public television, and we started talking about our commitment to public service in education, in public safety, in civic leadership, what we do at the community level that nobody else does. We reminded our friends in Congress and in various state capitals that what they're actually investing in is work that we do on television and not on television that enhance community and public service. And when we made that leap from just we have better programming than other people have to saying we have a mission in public service that no one else is performing that is essential to your communities and to our country, people from all across the ideological spectrum began to say, well, we'd never thought of it quite that way before, and that's a very interesting case that you're making. My most famous convert was Mike Pence. Mike Pence, as a member of the House of Representatives, had led an effort in 2005 to cut off funding for public broadcasting. He and I had been working on a completely different set of issues. I was still at the Washington Post Company when I first met him, and we were working on a federal shield law to protect the confidentiality of journalist sources, and we got to be friends. And when I took this job with public television, then Congressman Pence said, why don't you come up to lunch and let's talk about this? And he said, I like you, but I don't like public television. What's all this? So I was able to explain to Congressman Pence over lunch that this is what he was actually investing in. Public television provides the only preschool education for more than half the kids in America. We have this elaborate public safety mission that provides emergency alerting services and so forth. And we are the C-SPAN of state governments. We work on programming at the local level that celebrates local history and culture and public affairs. And he said, well, no one ever explained it to me quite like that before. He gets elected governor of Indiana in 2012 and puts money in his own state budget to support the work of public television in Indiana.
Great.
I bring him to Washington in 2014 to accept the Champion of Public Broadcasting Award 9 years after he tried to eliminate our funding.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave this wonderful speech accepting the award. And I found out later that he had written every word of it himself. He said, "You have made a believer out of me." And we have repeated that process with people across the ideological spectrum, across the partisan aisle, for 14 years. And that is the reason that we have the support that we have in Congress and in state capitals, both Republican and Democratic, around the country.
We'll continue our conversation with Pat right after this short break. Another one of the things on our list, I also have on petercunio.com a list of things that I recommend for young people to learn leadership. And one of them is simply to study history, because we've all heard the phrase past is prologue. And I do believe that you can learn a lot from studying other successful leaders in history, not just Americans and so on. And I've now served on the foundation board of the National Archives for 14 years. And it's been a wonderful experience. And the audience should know that the reason I've had that wonderful experience and learned a lot about leadership is you. One of the areas of your career, your background, your experiences that we haven't talked about yet is, in fact, service in the private sector. Both public companies, maybe, well, I guess both were public companies. If you will, the Los Angeles Times person in D.C.,
right,
so to speak, and then you started that role, I think, also with the Washington Post, and then moved on to running businesses for the Post. Can you talk a little bit about the differences? How did you cope with making the leap from government, let's say, to organizations that were very profit-oriented, as they should be?
Sure. Bob Urburu was the chairman and CEO of Times Mirror, the parent of the Los Angeles Times, in the mid-1980s, when I was recruited to be what he called his ambassador to Washington. And what that meant was handling not only government relations, but philanthropic enterprises, and just getting the word out about what Times Mirror was and what we were trying to accomplish as a company, and also helping to find things in the Washington area that the company might be interested in acquiring. And during my tenure, we bought the Baltimore Sun, we bought Broadcasting and Cable magazine, we bought National Journal. So I started out as in this ambassadorial role, and it just evolved into a more traditional sort of business role as well. That has been my experience not only at Times Mirror, but also at the Washington Post Company, where I was brought in as a vice president without any suffix, and not vice president for anything. They just said, "We'll figure it out." And so the then president of the Washington Post Company, a man named Alan Spoon, said, "You're going to be the Jose Oquendo of the Washington Post Company," which is to say Jose Oquendo was a player for the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, and he was the only person who ever played all 9 positions. So Alan said, "You're going to be as versatile as any executive we have in this company, and we just want you to figure out how many ways in which you can be helpful." So that evolved into everything from helping to devise new advertising strategies for the Post, to working on issues that involved protecting the First Amendment, to creating these new businesses that you spoke about. I was the founder and first president of Newsweek Productions, and we produced 200 hours of good nonfiction programming. I started a conference business for the company and led a coalition of companies, ours and several others, that found the spectrum and essentially created the spectrum technology that made the smartphone possible some years later. And so it was a wide variety of responsibilities and opportunities that I had at the Washington Post Company over 18 years. We had a very small company called Kaplan, which was in the test preparation business, and we grew Kaplan into a very large company that provided higher education services and many other things, job training and so forth, in addition to test prep. And being able to be part of a team that grew businesses, that created businesses, that encouraged what we called intrapreneurship, not entrepreneurship, but intrapreneurship, which is building businesses within your own company. That turned out to be something I was pretty good at, and so I found myself just going from one strength to another. I mean, I wasn't as good at all of these things as I should have been, having never gone to business school, but I figured it out. And it was a great experience for me. So that when I was finally able to be the CEO myself at the grand old age of 61, when I joined America's public television stations, I had learned from the masters in both corporate America and in political America how to lead. And those, as well as the what you were kind enough to say about my parents being a great influence on me and others in my life, and so I felt at 61 I was ready, and as we've discussed, we were able to do some great things in public television in those years, and so it all adds up, and you should never stop learning, and you should never stop growing. And being of service in as many ways as you possibly can. That's been my goal for my life, and that's what I've tried to do.
We've got more leadership lessons for you after this break. Another one of our essentials, our 32 essentials, is basically says, forget your successes, learn from your mistakes. Remember your mistakes. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think mistakes are your best teachers. I wish I'd made some so that I could. No, no. I've made plenty, and I've learned plenty from them. And I think there is great wisdom in your formulation there. And I think any leader who is not willing to acknowledge that he or she has made mistakes is really not much of a leader, because we're all human, and if we're not taking risks, if we're not willing to be wrong, if we're not willing to be unsuccessful on one thing or another, we're not really leading. We're playing it safe, and that is not leadership. I think you put it exactly right that mistakes are the best things, the best teachers for us as leaders, and you try not to make any more than you have to make, but they are going to be inevitable if you're going to try great things and try to be bold and try to be inventive. And the mantra out in Silicon Valley is to fail fast. I think there's some wisdom in that also. I mean, try something. If it works, that's great. If it doesn't work, move on to something else, but don't hold on to something because it's your precious idea. That kind of rigor, I think, is useful in whatever enterprise that we're in, whether it's business or politics or government or the teaching professions or the law or anything else. As long as you're growing, as long as you're learning, you're going to be making mistakes and learn from those. And you'll get better every year.
For our audience, I think we try to make the point here that failure is not failure necessarily. This is how we make big leaps in life, actually, and get better. Of course, no one wants to fail. We'd all like to be perfect, but unfortunately, we're all human, and by definition, we're not perfect. And so we will make mistakes along the way. But I think the key is for people who aspire to be leaders, who are in our audience today, or people who are leaders who aspire to get better, I think the key point here is that, to your point, you're going to have to take risks to be an effective leader and learn from those risks. No, it wasn't someone else's fault.
Right.
No,
Well,
it wasn't bad luck.
right.
I don't really believe in bad luck, really. Certainly not a string of bad luck. And so,
well, taking responsibility is the most important thing, I think, of a leader. One of the examples that I hold in highest regard is General Eisenhower's letter, his statement that he never had to make, but he wrote out this statement in advance of D-Day, saying that in the event that the invasion of Europe had failed, that the responsibility for this is mine alone.
Yes.
I mean, that's leadership.
That is.
And,
I agree.
And I think we could use a lot more people like that, and a lot more people sharing that kind of attitude, that I'm responsible, and that I take that responsibility seriously, and I take it genuinely. And Eisenhower is right at the top of my heroes list.
I served under some great officers. As you know, I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was an officer in the U.S. Navy on a guided missile destroyer. I did serve under some great leaders who would admit their mistakes. What they were concerned about was, okay, let's fix it as fast as possible. And I think in my business career, I've been the same way, because I learned it's okay. What's not okay is to fix the mistakes or kid yourself about responsibility and so on. And so, yeah, we're always going to have those situations.
Well, the other thing that I think is important to leadership, not you ask, but I think having a sharp focus on what it is you're trying to accomplish. I mean, it's not just having the job or the nice office or whatever it is, but what are you going to accomplish in the position that you're in, whether you're at the top of the chain or moving up. One of the things I admired about President Reagan, for example, was his focus on 4 things. He said, I want to cut taxes, I want to reduce regulation, I want to rebuild our national defense, and I want to make America stand tall in the world again. And anything else, that's what I got a cabinet for. Those are the things that I'm going to be focused on. And everybody knew what his priorities were. And he worked very hard over 8 years to achieve those goals, and he did. And the American people appreciated that he was doing what he was doing, that they thought he had picked the right 4 things, and they gave him one of the largest electoral reelection victories in the history of the country. Not because he was the most brilliant manager in the world, but because he was a strong, focused, effective leader, inspiring leader. And that's another example that anyone who aspires to leadership should take seriously.
Well, Pat, it's been great. Thank you so much. Appreciate. I learned a few things from you, as I always do, but I learned a few more things today, and not only about you, but about other people, and very inspiring. And so, thank you very much for coming on, and want to wish you the best of luck, because I know you're not done. You've described quite a career, but I know you're still going strong. Well, maybe we'll talk about that next.
Well, I'd love to do it, and thank you for inviting me. This has been great fun. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Pat. That's it for this episode of Superhero Leadership. A big thank you to my friend and brother-in-law, Pat Butler, for sharing his keen leadership insights and experiences. I hope you join me again next time. Until then, stay focused, stay driven, and keep leading like a superhero with purpose, passion, and integrity. I'm Peter Cuneo.